And so if we can all create a culture where mistakes are celebrated, they're approached with curiosity, then they'll start to seem valuable and they'll be more commonplace.
Hello there, and welcome to today's episode of the Easy EdTech Podcast. My name is Monica Burns, and I am so glad that you're here to join me today. If you want to make the most of education technology, aka EdTech, well, you are in the right place. My goal has always been to help make EdTech easier and give you ideas you can try yourself, share with a colleague, or bookmark for later in the school year. Every Tuesday here on the Easy EdTech Podcast, you'll hear stories from my time in the classroom, the work I do now with schools and districts, and my travels to different EdTech events. Get ready for solo episodes where I share some quick tips and stories, and interviews full of practical ideas and stories from new guests each month. If we mention something you'd like to check out, make sure to click the link. You'll find it in the episode description or the summary area where you're listening to this podcast, or you can find every episode and all of the resources we mention by going to classtechtips.com/podcast, or by going to classtechtips.com and just clicking on the Easy EdTech Podcast button at the top of the page. This episode is sponsored by Kira. What if every teacher had a nonstop assistant and every student had a personalized tutor? That's the promise of Kira. Kira's AI-powered teaching assistant helps educators save time, personalize lessons, and keep instruction moving. And with Kira's AI tutor, students get safe, one-on-one support exactly when they need it. Because teachers are the most creative people in the classroom, AI should fuel that creativity, not replace it. Kira supports teachers in their teaching, students in their learning, and just like students, Kira keeps learning too. Learn more at kira-learning.com. That's Kira, Kira-learning.com. This week's episode is titled Mistake-Friendly Classroom Strategies You'll Want to Try Tomorrow with Emma Chiappetta. And it was so much fun chatting with Emma for this episode. She is a fellow ASCD author and has a new book that just came out this summer. It's called Learning by Mistake: 12 Strategies to Turn Student Errors into Opportunities. And that's just what we talk about together today. Strategies and activities you can try out tomorrow with students. I think you'll love everything Emma has to share today. Let's dive in. Welcome to the podcast, Emma. I'm so excited to chat with you today about creating a safe space to learn for students. But before we get into all of that, what is your role in education? Can you share with listeners, what does your day-to-day look like?
Yeah, my name's Emma Chiappetta. I've been an educator for about 15 years, but I'm currently taking a step back from teaching because I have a 1-year-old, Zyla, and I'm enjoying spending tons of time with her. While I do that, I'm still working part-time as an instructional coach. And so my day-to-day includes a lot of chasing my daughter around, but it also includes, co-planning a lesson with a teacher, observing a class, or brainstorming ideas for an assessment, which is one of my favorite things to do.
Amazing. And just that idea of taking that pause, right? And having conversations like this one today, right? To reflect on your experiences, to share what you're doing, right? In the present right now to, I often people ask about inspiration for a book, and that's kind of a tough question that I can't help but ask you, even though I struggle to answer it sometimes. But what kind of gave you that first push or that spark? What inspired you to write a book focused on helping students shift their mindset around mistakes?
Yeah, so I have always been kind of afraid of making mistakes myself. I think a lot of us educators were those perfectionists in high school, and we were afraid of being wrong in front of our peers. And I think that when I became a teacher, I saw those same anxieties creeping up in my students, and I really wanted to help them get past that because, we all learn from mistakes, and I think we all understand the value of them. Probably some of my most meaningful lessons have come from times that I messed something up.
Yeah.
And so I really wanted to help shift the culture and bridge that divide between this is something that's really helpful for us, and yet we're afraid to do it. And like you said, like taking this pause to be with my daughter, I feel like I'm learning so much more about learning by watching how a baby learns. And they're making mistakes constantly. All they do is fall down and they get right back up. And so can we take that, baby mindset about being resilient in the face of mistakes and grow that into our learners that are in elementary school, middle school, high school?
I love that observation because I think it's so easy for us, in education, right, as maybe perfectionists, right? I think I fall into that category of wanting things to be just a certain way, right? We often can say that like a mistake is okay, but we don't always feel that same way, right, in our own practice. And that is a big mindset shift. And so, when you think about classroom culture, what role does classroom culture play in how kids respond to making mistakes?
I think that classroom culture is really everything when it comes to how we look at and respond to making mistakes. And unfortunately, our mistake anxieties get embedded when we're really young. You might be with your group of friends in first grade and mispronounce a word and your friends laugh at you. And then you get scared. And then you go to class in second grade and you answer a question wrong and your teacher looks disappointed in you. Then you get to middle school and you start getting bad grades for messing up and you become afraid to ask for help and afraid to make mistakes again because there's this constant reinforcement that mistakes are bad, and mistakes require punishment. But luckily, since mistake culture is so tied to classroom cultures, teachers have a lot of power in shifting that. And in my book, I talk about these 4 different levers that we can kind of turn in order to change the culture around mistakes, either for the positive or for the negative. The first of those is punishment. So, for example, giving bad grades for mistakes and not allowing retakes. That reinforces that this is a bad thing, this should not happen. Another thing is one of the other levers is teacher strategies. So those are the things that we do in class every day, the lessons, the activities that either normalize mistakes and draw attention to how they can be beneficial, or, we might have classroom activities that do the exact opposite, that send the message to students that they should never be making mistakes. The third is the way that teachers react to the mistakes that students make. There's a big difference between saying, no, let's ask someone else for the right answer, and saying, that's interesting. How did you come to that conclusion? Let's talk about it. And the final lever, and possibly the most powerful one, is peer reactions. So students care so much about how their peers perceive them. And so if their peers don't know how to properly respond to mistakes and they're laughing and making fun of somebody for messing up in class, it's just going to become this traumatic event. And so if we can all create a culture where mistakes are celebrated, they're approached with curiosity, then they'll start to seem valuable and they'll be more commonplace.
And just that idea of different angles to address this, I think is important for someone to say, how can we create this full classroom culture? It may be my interactions, it may be the things I say, it may be what we're instilling in a group mentality to have conversations about this. And, we talk so much about modeling when it comes to showing the steps to solve a math problem, or when we're reading aloud a book to students and pointing out a context clues strategy. But we know that kids are watching and learning and all different parts of the day. So how can teachers model mistake making in ways that feel authentic and build trust with students?
Yeah, I think that's such an important question. And I don't think it's only about modeling mistake making. I also think it's about modeling how to respond to mistakes. because that's how you're going to turn that peer response lever, is you need to teach the students how to respond when their peers make a mistake as well. But yeah, so modeling making mistakes as a teacher, I have this activity that I do with my students at the beginning of every class. And I do it to sort of normalize mistakes and set the tone at the beginning of each class period that this is a place where we're all going to make mistakes, and that's totally great. And the way that we do that is I have all the students' names on the board, and I give a prompt that's really silly and totally unrelated to class content. So nobody's like feeling high stakes like they're supposed to know. So it might be something like, how many eggs does the average American eat in a year? And everybody makes a guess, and I write their responses on the board. And they were hesitant at first, every year, and then they slowly start to love the activity. So much so that one student decided he wanted to facilitate it. So he came in with his own prompt and he wrote it on the board, and I sat with the class and I had to participate on this day. And at first, I felt that mistake anxiety that all of my students do. I was like, oh my gosh, what if I am way off and they all think that like their teacher is not as smart as they are? So I got really nervous, but I participated. I was just as wrong as everyone else. I was probably farther away than some of the students. And, we talked about it and laughed, and it was great. And I felt my own mistake anxiety ease.
Yeah.
And so I think for them to like see me play their game, and also for me to experience what it felt like for them, was really powerful. So that's just like one way that I think about modeling. But if you're thinking about it more on like a day-to-day and content related way. Like you said, math teachers are often presenting a problem at the board. Like, we make mistakes when we present problems at the board. Own it. Point out that you made a mistake. Explain to your students what you were thinking that led you to that mistake, because then they see that like mistakes are logical. They do come from a place of, they even come from a place of intelligence. They come from your prior thinking. And then show them how you recognize the mistake. Then you're modeling the whole process of how you learn from it. Another thing that I often do is not necessarily making the mistake in front of my students, but telling them, when I was learning this, I always messed up, blah, blah, blah. So I kind of like call it to their attention that, okay, first red flag, here's something you might mess up. And also, I'm here with you. I also made these same mistakes that you are.
I love these examples because they feel so doable in different contexts, right? And it's so funny you mentioned kind of doing the role reversal with the question, because when you said like, how many eggs does someone consume? Like, I don't want to say I panicked, but I like thought to myself, like, I don't even know. Like, I don't know what I would say to that, right? That was my first thought when you said that question. So, and we're not even playing a game in front of other people, right?
Yeah.
So I just think that's even something, for families who are listening and are like, how do I, like, that's a car ride game. That's a subway game to play. Like, just a quick question and like no wrong answers. We all got there using this different prior knowledge that we have, whether it got us to the right answer or not. So I just love that framing of like, I've made mistakes like this, or this is the kind of thing that caught me the first time I did this. It just feels like a way that we could all do some storytelling and make everyone comfortable with this learning process, because it really is the process, right, of moving through. And, your book doesn't focus specifically on tech or ed tech, but I wanted to ask if there were digital tools or platforms that could bring some of these activities to life.
Yeah. So one of the activities I talk about in the book is a multiple choice, like a set of multiple choice questions. And for each question, every single option is wrong. So I call it which wrong is the most right. And the reason that I like this from a mistake culture activity or mistake culture perspective is that it kind of removes the anxiety of, I need to pick the correct answer, because there is no correct answer. And it's all focused on just the logic behind the answer. And there's a tech tool that I love to use for this activity. And I've used Poll Everywhere, which it's the same idea as clickers, but it embeds into Google Slides. And I'm sure there are other clicker apps that do the same thing. But basically, you present the question and the options on the board, and then the students can click in their answer. and it'll show a bar graph with the distribution of all the choices. And so then the students can kind of see, like, okay, we all guessed different things. Maybe there's one answer that had the most guesses, but that doesn't mean it's the right answer because they're all wrong. And then it leads to a pretty good discussion because I can ask the class, someone who answered A, could you give your justification? Someone who answered B, could you give your justification? And it also has this anonymous feature, which when we're building a healthy culture around mistakes, we do want students to be comfortable making them openly. But as they're getting there, the anonymity can be really helpful. For allowing them to be vulnerable. And then if they want to share, then when we have that discussion at the end, they can offer, I chose B and this is why.
No, and that makes a lot of sense too when we think about scaffolding this for kids, building up that comfort level. And, that's a great kind of way to get everyone participating. And have you seen teachers using technology, maybe digital journaling, collaborative tools, video reflections to help students process, but then also reflect on a mistake that they've made?
Yeah, so there are really simple digital tools that you can use for this. In my book, I have some templates for mistake journals where students can track the mistakes that they made, and they'll also kind of classify the mistake as either like an aha mistake or a careless mistake. Well, actually, we don't like to use the word careless, but a mistake that came from just like overlooking something. So they'll have a column for writing the mistake, a column for classifying it, a column for the correct answer. And all of these can be done either in a table in Google Docs, or you could have a spreadsheet with some pull downs. And then teachers can leave comments directly in the document, which is really great. Another thing is I've seen teachers use video to facilitate test corrections. And I think that's fantastic. Whether you do a screencast or you kind of mount your phone above your work, the student will point exactly to their mistakes. They can explain their logic verbally, which is really helpful for some students who can't, get it down on paper by hand. If they're just talking about it, it's a lot easier for them to explain their line of thinking. And they can point to what they did wrong. They can explain their line of thinking that led to it and then explain the correct answer. And so I think that that's a really great way to do, it's not quite mistake analysis, but you could even do mistake analysis that way too.
Yeah, even if it's formal or informal, in terms of the structure of it. I think that idea, a screencast, I love for so many reasons. And I do think that's a nice way for someone to, just talk through, feels more conversational, it can feel a little less formal. And it's giving a teacher a lot of really great information for driving future instruction, or in addition to just having kids, the powerful pieces we're talking about today. So for anyone who's looking for kind of their entry point, maybe it's through that kind of lens.
I think that being able to hear what line of thinking led a student to a mistake is such a critical piece of formative assessment for teachers.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, I would imagine you've got some stories and some observations and things you've seen in your own practice and that other people have brought to you, around the impact that these mindset shifts have had. What kind of impact have you seen them have on student motivation or on student engagement in a longer term view?
Yeah, so maybe the most obvious impact that I've noticed is, so I use one-on-one conferences to assess my students on each learning target. And after I started being really intentional about addressing the mistake culture in my class, I made a point to ask my students, where might you mess up when you are executing this learning target, when you're doing the skill? Or what did you think when you started this module, this learning target? And what do you think now? And their ability to reflect on those mistakes and the potential mistakes that they could see other students making just skyrocketed. They became so good at anticipating where something might go wrong and where someone might get confused. And that indicates two things to me. One, it indicates that they're not going to make those mistakes as frequently because they know how to look for them and they know to watch out for them. Another thing it indicates is that they're comfortable talking about the mistakes that they've made. So we have kind of started to shift the culture and ease that anxiety, because now they're seeing the mistake not as something that is speaking to their character or showing them as a bad student, but they're seeing it as something that they all do. It's expected. Like if my teacher is asking me where I might mess up, then it's kind of expected that I'm going to mess up sometimes. And so it's a good indicator that the culture is shifting to something that's more healthy. In terms of motivation, I think that whenever a student is more comfortable making a mistake, they're more willing to take a risk, and learning takes risks. If you don't try, then you are not going to make it very far. And there's actually research that says that if you let's say you take a pretest before a unit and you answer 6 out of 10 questions wrong, you're more likely to remember the correct answers to the 6 that you got wrong than the ones that you had gotten right on the pretest. So messing up, making a mistake actually primes your brain to learn something better. And so once my students can start recognizing this and start becoming more comfortable making mistakes, they're actually learning more deeply, and their learning is lasting longer.
And I love that, because I do think that resonates so much, right? Of like, I remember the things that got me this grade, maybe not in the great way, even if it was, right, an A-. Like you remember that little piece, right, in between like your aspirational, right, goal for it. So that's such a good reminder too, for why someone might invest some energy, right, in bringing this work into their practice. And, if there is someone who's listening here, whether they're a classroom teacher working with students day to day, or maybe coaching other educators, if there's someone who wants to start this work but isn't sure where to begin, what advice would you give them on where to get started?
I think the first step is to take the pulse of the mistake culture that is already existent in your classroom. That's where I started. I just started asking my students, how do you feel about making a mistake, either in my class or in school in general? And their answers were enlightening. I mean, most of them recognized that mistakes were important to their learning, but they were terrified. And they were typically more terrified in classes where their grades mattered more than, say, their elective classes. They told me that they were more willing to make mistakes in elective classes because they were pass-fail. And so grades do play into this quite a bit. And then from there, once you understand your student's perspective, you can start really small. So you can do a bell ringer like the one that I was describing before, where students are guessing at the beginning of class, just to set the tone. You could change your language around mistakes and the way that you give feedback. And there's actually a whole chapter in my book about how we can make small tweaks to our language that have a big impact. And then you could throw in a mistake analysis lesson every once in a while. You don't have to do anything huge in order to have a big impact on the culture here.
But those little shifts, right, they add up, they make movement, and they have, they can have such a great impact. So, Emma, this was such an informative, actionable conversation for listeners. I'm going to link out to all the things so that people can find your new book and where to follow along. But for anyone who's like on the move and making a mental bookmark of where to go, where can people connect with you? Where can they learn more about your work and new book?
Yeah, so my new book is available through ASCD. That's called Learning by Mistake, 12 Strategies to Turn Student Errors into Opportunities. And that's where you can read a ton of detail about my perspective on this. I also have a book called Creating Curious Classrooms, and that's available on Amazon. And if you want any free reading from me, I've got a ton on Edutopia, so you can check out my author page there. And if you'd like to contact me, I'm at Emma J. Chiappetta on Twitter, or what was formerly known as Twitter.
Perfect. I know I still call it Twitter. I can't get over that. the mental component there. But Emma, this was fantastic. Thank you so much for your time and your resources and ideas today.
Thanks so much for having me.
It was so much fun chatting with Emma today. If you are curious about this topic, you'll definitely want to grab a copy of her new book. We'll add it to the Amazon collection I've got set up for authors who've appeared here on the podcast. You can find it from ASCD's website, of course, too. But let's finish up with a few key points from today's episode. Mistake culture starts with classroom culture. Small language shifts can make a big impact on student confidence. Silly, low-stakes guessing games help normalize risk-taking. Screencasts help students reflect on their thought process. Remember, you can find the show notes and the full list of resources from this episode, including all of the ways to connect with Emma, by heading to easyedtechpodcast.com and finding today's episode. Thank you to Kira for sponsoring this episode. Teaching is hard enough, and you deserve tools that give you time back. That's where Kira can help. It's an AI-powered teaching assistant built just for educators, supporting everything from lesson prep to grading to real-time student help. Want to see how it can lighten your load? Head to kiralearning.com and create a free account. That's kira-learning.com, where the AI learns with you and for you. Thank you for listening to this new episode of the Easy EdTech Podcast. I love creating new episodes for you each week, but I could use a bit of help spreading the word about the podcast. Can you leave a rating or review on your favorite podcast app? Spotify will let you tap on the stars, and Apple Podcasts will let you tap on the stars and leave a 1 or 2 sentence review. Thank you so much for taking this extra step. It helps other educators find episodes like this one when they're searching for EdTech tips.